looking at you, kid.
I'm Charles Foster Kane!
Hey, Stella!
Suck on this.
Welcome back to the channel, everybody. James Hancock here. Today, the topic at hand is Criterion Collection's new Blu-ray release for Happiness, directed by Todd Solondz or Solondz. I've heard both. I'm not sure which is correct, but joining me for this discussion is my fellow Todd Solondz enthusiast, Marcus Pinn from Pinn Empire, the undisputed GOAT of the side-by-side comparison. Marcus and I have tackled the work of Todd Solondz before, way back on Wrong Reel 153, when we reviewed Wiener Dog upon its initial release, and I can't think of a better dance partner for this discussion. So with all that out of the way, Mr. Pinn, welcome back to the show. Catch us up on everything that you've been up to.
Hello. Yeah, Pinn Empire is still active, still going. I feel like I've been saying this for like years at this point, but my film site, Pinn Empire, I tied it into my Twitter a lot, and now that I've been shadow banned still for like 4.5 years, you know, I just want to remind folks that Pinn Empire is still there. It's still going. I've been doing kind of 3 things at once. I've been updating, you know, with new reviews of new movies. I've been updating old reviews. My opinions have changed on stuff in the almost 14 years that I've been doing this film blog. And then I've also been taking old reviews from an old publication that I used to write for that just no longer exists. And I wrote for them on and off for about 3 years. And half of it was just throwaway movies I didn't even care about. But the other half were movies that I really did like. So, you know, I save and archive everything. So I've been throwing those up. It's just, let's see, like The Sweet Blood of Jesus, Zhaozha, Welcome to New York, stuff like that. So, yeah, I'm kind of super active.
Which movie have you gone back and kind of revisited or revised your opinion where the stock of the movie either went way up or way down in the interim?
Zhaozha, or I think it's Hauha, maybe, because
Gotcha.
that's how Martin Kessler pronounces it. It's the Viggo Mortensen starring Lisandro Alonso movie, came out in 2015, and last year you guys have been hearing me rave about it on Wrong Reel. He did this movie Eureka, also starring Viggo Mortensen, kind of. And I was like, wow, this is like the best thing I've seen in years. And I went back and watched Zhaozha, their previous collaboration, which I thought was just fine when I first saw it.
I thought you were just saying Georgia with a southern accent. So yeah.
Zhaozha. No, it's Jauja, like
Gotcha.
litter. That's how it's, yeah.
Because I know you have a few southern relatives, so.
Oh, 50% of who I am are from Spartanburg, South Carolina. No, but it's really, really good. Like really good. And I'm a big Lisandro Alonso fan. So, side note, I think Eureka has a distribution deal. I think it's playing in a few places in the country, but it'll be streaming anytime soon now. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Well, any plans on hitting any flicks at the New York Film Festival? So far, I've caught Nora, and today I caught Hard Truths, and I've got a few more on deck. But what is your film going schedule for the next week or two?
I'm in the midst of it. This past weekend, I saw the new Matty Diop film, which got acquired by HBO.
Nice.
So it's going to be on Max soon. Really good movie. It was kind of bittersweet. It made me miss my parents. It's the kind of movie that my dad especially, would like. It's just short documentary, 67 minutes long, about African history as it relates between the relationship between France and Benin. Definitely sounds very textbook and dry to a lot of folks, so it's not for everybody, but I enjoyed it. And then I saw the new Guy Madden film. I almost missed it, but I was able to see that.
I did miss the press screening. I was reviewing friggin' Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, and I was in a cab trying to make it to the screening, but because of the storm from the hurricane, I got stuck. But luckily, It comes out on the 18th here in New York, so I'll be seeing rumors in the very near future, but the trailer looks fucking hysterical.
Yeah, it's very good, but I don't want to... it's still fresh in my mind. I'm trying not to be, it's the best thing he's done in a long time, but it's like, that is what I'm leaning towards. But I try not to just say that instantly, but I kind of, technically I did just say it. And then after this podcast, I'm going to be seeing the new Albert Serra film. He's a European art house director a lot of folks aren't into, but I like his movies a lot. He's another favorite of Martin Kessler's. And then a few days after that is the new Cronenberg.
Yep.
Which
I'm
I'm
seeing the
hearing
press screening
mixed
of that
reviews.
tomorrow. Yeah, I've got
Oh,
the
boy.
Shrouds on
Okay.
deck tomorrow, and then on Friday is The Room Next Door and Queer. I don't know if I'll be able to do a double feature or not, but I'll try. And then there's Blitz the following week. But those are some of the ones that I've got on the immediate horizon.
Yeah, no, it's really cool since with the exception of 2004 and 2007, I've been going to the New York Film Festival now for, 2 decades almost. It's been a New York staple. Anytime, especially these days when I get in these little moods where I'm just sick of New York City, anytime I go to the festival, I always like that part of Manhattan anyway, but like the film culture, they got the Criterion van outside of the Alice Tully Hall. No, it's really cool. I like it. I definitely miss.
And you got
going with my
legends
buddy,
like Tilda Swinton and Julianne Moore strutting around and things like
just
that.
hanging out. Yeah. And then, you overhear film conversations that sometimes I might jump into or sometimes just listen. I'm used to going with my buddy Rob. He's been busy this year. Rob going to at least 2 movies at the festival a year with Rob is just kind of like a regular for me. And then you bump into other
Do you ever
folks,
listen to those conversations and kind of quietly judge people? It's like when you're watching a Todd
Sometimes, yeah.
Solondz movie,
Yeah,
like when you hear a character saying something like, "Oh, did you see Jay Leno?" And like in the context of the movie, the character doesn't realize they're being ridiculed by Todd Solondz for liking something as vapid as watching like
Right.
Jay Leno and that sort of
Exactly.
things. But I will listen to conversations in line before screenings. And I'm like, I hate you, I admire you, and you I'm just going to leave alone. But I'm spying on everybody when I'm in line.
2008, one of the worst. This is when I had to jump. I even apologized before I started talking. I was like, I'm sorry, I have to say something. It was 2008, and they were talking about the second Nolan Batman movie, and how great it is, and how great Christopher Nolan is, and blah blah blah. And they were saying like, it's about time they got like actual filmmakers to make these superhero films. And then I was like, huh? Like I had to just say, huh? Like I couldn't help myself. And I was like, yeah, but like Sam Raimi has done Spider-Man movies. And then this guy said to me, I'm not lying. He goes, yeah, but like Christopher Nolan's like a filmmaker. Sam Raimi's not really that. You know what I mean? And then I was like, I had to like, like those like old like Looney Tunes, like the boiling teapot kettle. I was like, all right, okay. And I just had to, I was like, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah, it's amazing how there are still so many people that will cling to the idea that for a movie to be real cinema, it has to be serious. I'm like, well, say that to the fucking Marx Brothers. Like, did Groucho Marx not make real cinema? Like, well, tell that to Woody Allen. He liked Groucho Marx quite a bit and that sort of thing. But anyway,
especially when it's especially when it's based in a comic book movie, and that's not. I'm not one of these people like those are very like graphic novels, even like the standard issue comic books. They have their silly parts. They're very colorful and not always serious. But there's still an art in that. It's not they're less than just because they're not. You know what I mean? Which is funny. I do have to. I got randomly. I do have to say I got nominated for a Los Angeles Film Journal Award. I didn't.
Nice,
win,
very nice. Well done.
But the only reason I bring that up is because it was an article I wrote for this film publication called Alta Journal, and I wrote about Robert Townsend, and I wrote this article about how like. Yes, I get it. It's an important movie, and there's a lot of black films that are important, but sometimes they're meant to be funny. Like laugh at them. Like don't just put the important label on it and then just kind of push it aside. Like
and he was fucking hysterical.
Right. The movie itself is funny. It's like it makes you like it's intentionally low budget. You can see that it's low budget, but it doesn't work against the film. It's like everything isn't some like serious, like important, groundbreaking thing. You know what I mean? So, but
yeah. And also Eddie Murphy wasn't the only comedian working in the 1980s. There were other guys making funny movies.
Sure. As that movie talks about, it's a point.
Yeah, I mean, with that whole lengthy series, like everything, we're really looking for somebody who can be much more like Eddie Murphy. He's like, anyway, but he does actually a pretty spot on impersonation, which I thought was hysterical. Well, let's start shifting gears into the topic at hand. The Criterion Blu-ray for Happiness. I also still have my beloved DVD, which I've been hanging on to. I know you've got yours as well. But
my son put it somewhere. I was going to hold it, and I don't know. He said he wanted to see it. It's a colorful, But
yeah, maybe tell him to wait a year or two before he's ready for Todd Solondz. But I should also add that any clips you see in this video come from the DVD. I know how to rip DVDs. I don't know how to rip Blu-rays, so I apologize for not having Blu-ray quality during this video. But let's just start in broad strokes. At the risk of getting overly sentimental about the 90s, it has to be said that it was a pretty incredible decade for American independent filmmaking, arguably the best decade where suddenly independent filmmakers had like the same cool status or cool factor as like rock stars. And of all the directors who dabbled in satire or dark comedy, I feel like Todd Solondz or Todd Solondz or Todd, however you want to call him, he kind of stands alone when it comes to pitch black, masterful dark comedy. But if you had to zero in on what like made his style pop for you, like what makes his style unique and worthy of preservation by Criterion, what is it about his movies that first grabbed you way back in the day? Like, how did you discover him? Which was the first movie that really grabbed your attention?
Oh, well, Todd Solondz has a special place in the hearts of anybody from Amherst, Massachusetts, because technically his second film, Welcome to the Dollhouse, co-stars an Amherst alum, Eric Mabius. He played Steve, the heartthrob in that movie.
Yeah, who sings the theme song, Welcome to the Dollhouse.
So when that movie came out, it was like a big deal. Because for those that don't know, I talk about it a lot on any podcast I'm on, but I'm from Amherst. Amherst is a small town. So when anyone like, wow, somebody from this small town is on the big screen, it's like a big deal. And for a small town, we've produced, Uma Thurman, Ilan Mitchell-Smith. And for those that don't know who that is, he's the other guy in Weird Science. He's not Anthony Michael Hall. He's,
those are women's underpants. He's the guy who wore the women's underpants.
Exactly, on his head. And even now, man, we got this movie Janet Planet by my elementary school classmate, Annie Baker, directed it, actually. My buddy Eben, who's on The Bear, he just won I think it's his second Emmy. So Amherst, very nice. I got a lot of hometown pride. But anyway, Welcome to the Dollhouse was a big deal for me. And not only that, I think for my generation, I'm that first wave of people after Gen X. And to me, Welcome to the Dollhouse is one of our defining movies, because it's like I was literally the same age as Dawn Wiener. When that movie came out, I was in the 8th grade, getting ready to go to 9th grade, just like Dawn Wiener was. A handful of the way the kids talk in that movie, it's similar to how when there's no adult around, that is how kids talk.
Like when the girl's talking about Steve, like, oh yeah, we finger fucked a few times, and I'm like, oh, right. And you see, Wiener Dog later on, like in front of the mirror, that iconic shot, looking at her hand and looking at her reflection, and it's like it's so warped and so demented, but so hilarious, but also. Like with much of Todd Solondz comedy, even when it's at its most vicious, it also simultaneously eerily touching and like emotionally moving in strange ways. Like nobody captures the way that people really talk to each other better than Todd Solondz.
Yeah, and I just thought Welcome to the Dollhouse captured that junior high era where it was just like, I guess I didn't have as much understandable dislike for that time as Dawn Wiener did. I actually liked growing up. I like middle school, like high school, but there's still a lot of awkwardness to it. But to answer your question directly, I think the thing about Todd Solondz's style that stood out so much then was the fact that like the subject matter in all of his movies was very dark, but there was still some, like you said, there's some wholesome stuff, there's some funny stuff, and just the color palette, whether it's the movie or the marketing of the movie, like the posters, the DVD box, or the VHS boxes, they're always like red, pink, blue, orange. It's like colors that are associated with kind of like, well, no pun intended, happiness. But a lot of stuff in the movie isn't happy, you know what I mean? But still funny, you know what I mean? Sometimes you forget there's this whole plot where Dawn's sister gets kidnapped by this guy, and it's like, oh yeah, right, I forgot. That's a movie I love, and every time I watch it, it's oh yeah, like the like final quarter of the movie, it's like a kidnapping, you know what I mean? And then in Happiness, he just kind of upped the ante. But then again, so much stuff surrounding it, like even the music. Sometimes the music is very like airy with the jangly guitars and like just stuff that makes you think of like, again, Happiness. It's almost like a Blue Velvet. It's almost his iteration of like the opening of Blue Velvet, where it's just like, oh, this is like Americana, but there's some dark stuff about to happen. Like that's kind of what it reminds me of. I think it's almost like he's post Bob Balaban. Like for those of you, the movie Parents.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
It reminds. I have no way of verifying, but I feel like I wonder if Todd Solondz like saw Parents and was like, oh, this
Yeah,
is
I actually
like,
saw it in the theater with the whole family.
oh, no way.
Yeah.
Oh, so lucky. I love that movie. Wow.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, that's kind of my
Well,
little
that
spiel.
leads me right into my next question, because on this Blu-ray, obviously it looks fucking great. And like, if you compare like, late 90s, early 2000s DVD quality versus this, it is night and day. But there are not a ton of features on here apart from 2 interviews, one between Todd Solondz and one of his old students, Charlotte Wells, who's now a filmmaker. And there's also an interview on there with Dylan Baker. But one thing that really jumped out at me on the interview during the interview with Charlotte Wells is how Todd Solondz admitted he's not a cinephile. He wasn't like a big giant movie freak growing up. He liked sitcoms. He liked TV. He liked kind of like trashy television. And I feel like you can feel the sitcom beats and the sitcom rhythms, and like once you like to mention the sitcom colors all over. And just as a way of preparing my first clip, it could almost be the intro to a sitcom from the late 90s, and I'm going to let it rip right now. I mean, you could play that and then have Happiness emblazoned across and then like start introducing all the characters, like, putting their hands on their hips and smiling, like, doing all the crap. But it's like, it is that sitcom sensibility. And I don't know if any other filmmaker has so successfully borrowed from the sitcom, because the sitcoms don't even really exist anymore. But here we are with Happiness. He's managed somehow to keep the spirit alive.
Right. No, exactly. That's another thing too. I always wonder if, especially in that American indie film around the same time, if Kevin Smith like opened that New Jersey door for Todd Solondz, because that's another defining thing about his movies too. It's that they're very like New Jersey. Welcome to the Dollhouse, Happiness, even storytelling part of that takes place. But then there's always, even just like in that clip you showed, there's always some kind of tie into New York City. Because I think, no offense to folks from New Jersey, but there's always like part of your identity is always kind of connected to New York. But it's always like leaving New York, going to New Jersey.
Yeah, whether you're part of the Bridge and Tunnel crowd or from Manhattan. But I think that's what made the indie craze of the 90s so fucking cool, is that, just from my own biased perspective, the great majority of the really cool American independent filmmaking taking place during the 90s was in and around New York, whether it's people from like the tri-state area, from New Jersey or whatever. But like, that's where the gravitational pull was. That's where all the cool, edgy producers and distributors were, like, companies like Killer Films and Good Machine and producers like Ted Hope. It really was like just like this incredible time capsule. And while there were certainly LA-based independent filmmakers, but like Hal Hartley, I feel like he is one of ours. And I feel like when you're with Jim Jarmusch, he was not from around here, but he was definitely a quintessential New York filmmaker, or Spike Lee or whomever.
Yeah.
And it's just funny how New York, I think one of the reasons I live here in New York, and I've lived here now for 16 years, is I just really love the movies that were set here, shot here, that took place around here. And also, I was in high school from 91 to 95 and college from 95 to 99. So the whole indie craze came along right at the perfect time, where like I didn't follow rock bands in the 90s. I followed independent filmmakers. And Todd Solondz, once I got exposed to his work, I was just like, oh my God, like, no one makes a movie quite like Todd Solondz.
I agree. No, it's funny you bring up Ted Hope also. We got to kind of know each other over the years, and I always thank him. The first like big look that Pinland Empire ever got was because Ted Hope shared something that I wrote. And it was on the subject that we're talking about. I wrote a little, it was just like I'm not gonna call it a rant, but it was just a thing about how, at the time, from around post Happiness. And I got to throw in guys like Todd Haynes, and you also mentioned him too, Hal Hartley. But I feel like they fathered so many, they fathered a very specific lane of indie film, right down to how they were marketed. Like the minute between Happiness and Welcome to the Dollhouse, it seemed like from 1999 on, so many American indie films used the like colorful, silly font. No matter how dark the movie was, they used a lot of the same color palettes. And I felt that Todd Solondz was a big contributor to that. And I love doing this episode because it comes full circle, because it's like, I'm a big Charlotte Wells fan. When I turned the DVD, I didn't even notice it at first. I didn't even read the back when I put it in. I was like, oh, Charlotte Wells. Oh, that was a student. And then it put me down this little rabbit hole where it was like, Todd Solondz also taught Chloe Zhao who's now, she won an Academy Award, and now she's in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Todd Solondz taught one of my good friends, Shaka King, another Oscar-nominated, filmmaker. So I think that's really cool. Like he definitely influenced folks, both directly and indirectly.
Yeah, I've mentioned this before, either on the podcast or maybe on this channel. But when you and I were about to tackle Wiener Dog, I remember I was over at the Angelica, and I can't remember if it was for that movie or around that time, but I heard his signature voice like 10 feet down from where I was at the concession stand. I think he was talking, like he was making some arrangements for a screening. And as soon as I heard him speak, I was like, "You're Todd Solondz." I was like, "I'm so jealous of all your students at NYU." And in his classic voice, he just said, "I don't think my students would agree." And I was like, "Oh my God." I can't imagine what it must be like to be one of your students, but right. I am very jealous of his students. I don't know how invested he is as a teacher, but it allows him to continue to survive because his movies, let it be said that they're not always smash hits. It's good for him to have a paying gig in between his movie projects.
That's funny. When I met him outside my job years ago, this was like just after what's the Palindromes came out.
Gotcha.
He just had me walking by my job. I was like, "Oh, hey, you're Todd Solondz." He took a picture with me and everything, and then I explained to him how like I tracked down the VHS of his very first movie, Fear, Anxiety, and Depression, and it was like,
which he stars.
Yeah, and he goes, "Why did you do that?" And I was like, "No, I'm a fan of your movies." He's like, "Oh, how much did it cost? I'll give you your money back." He was like, he said it's like the same.
Yeah, he almost quit movies after making that. I think he had a 6-year break after making. He was so demoralized, and then there was a lawyer who said, "If you come back and start making movies again, I'll finance the next feature." And that's what led to Welcome to the Dollhouse. And thank God he did, because Welcome to the Dollhouse is one of those independent movies where it transcended the art house. It transcended LA and New York. Like I first got exposed to it through my sister and one of her best friends who would just watch it and they would just crack up and they were quoting it religiously. His movies are incredibly quotable. And I do miss that from the 1990s, how there were just so many brilliant quotable comedies, whether you liked Jim Carrey movies or Ben Stiller movies or whatever the case may be, or you liked Todd Solondz movies or the Coen brothers. I just miss the days of people quoting comedies, but comedies don't really get made anymore. So it makes that period of the 90s all the more precious and special.
My friend, one of my best friends growing up, Tom Gilbert, he used to always say, "I want to be sure that you shit. I want to see it." He used to always quote that line from Welcome to the Dollhouse.
And if somebody has seen Welcome to the Dollhouse, you immediately have a kinship. That's one thing I think people miss when they're busy wagging their fingers in disapproval of inappropriate content. What they forget or overlook is that if you suddenly hear somebody quote your favorite comedy, like especially like a random, weird, obscure line, like, like if someone says like, "Oh, but it looks good on you," though, you're like, "Oh, that person's seen Caddyshack probably too many times, but I can at least talk about Caddyshack with them," and that sort of thing. So yeah, comedies have an amazing ability to kind of bring folks together. But getting back to the Blu-ray and that interview, I only have one note of criticism for that interview. Charlotte Wells has this nervous tick where every time she asks her former professor a question, she does this thing where she'll wipe her hand across her face and move her eyelids around and like shove her fingers in her eyes. I'm like, stop touching your face so much.
She does.
When you ask a question, you don't have to go, and then ask your question. I'm like, I don't know if it's like she's self-conscious, but she's a filmmaker. She should, speak clearly with a loud voice. But anyway, we all touch our faces too often. But I noticed in the interview, she shoves her fingers in her eyes over and over and over again. But I guess it's very fitting and appropriate because Todd Solondz, I mean, he's not exactly Brad Pitt in his delivery style either. So they work well together.
No, I agree. It was I said off record this Blu-ray. I'm old. I call, even if it's a Blu-ray, I call it a DVD.
Yeah.
But the Blu-ray sent me down this little quick rabbit hole, like I had said, and I was so surprised because look, I love After Sun, that's Charlotte Wells' feature debut. I love her short films too, and she's like on the younger side. She's another filmmaker where like for the most part her films are kind of her own. But the minute she says, like, "Yeah, I took this scene from Vin Vendors," or like, "I took this scene from Chantal Akerman," it's like, you absolutely did, but you're not trying to hide it. Lynn Ramsey's another one that, that she's big into. And I had, when she mentioned Chantal Akerman was a big influence for After Sun, which if you're familiar, you see it right away. I didn't look into who she was taught by. So discovering that Solondz was like one of her professors back in the day, I was like, oh, this is so cool. So I really enjoyed that. It made me
And they had an
actually
immediate rapport. He said of all of his
yeah,
students, he recognized very quickly with her, oh, she's an adult. She actually can discuss movies and not act like a hysterical child the entire time. I imagine any teacher teaching any subject, just dealing with the emotional melodrama of your students must be like, I'm either going to kill myself or them, but this has got to come to an end. But it sounds like,
sure.
but when you land on a student who really is receptive and has an adult point of view, then I guess it makes it all worth it. So yeah, I'm glad that Todd Solondz had Charlotte Wells to talk to.
Yeah, and he read her first script, and like kind of was legitimately encouraging, not like face value, like, yeah, it's good. He was just like, no, there's actually something here. So that's kind of for someone who, like, like we were saying, I don't know if he's happy about teaching. And to me, that's solidified in the Danny DeVito section of Wiener Dog. But it's like, it's nice to know that he still, encouraged at least one student to do something great. So
Well, while we're on the subject of screenplay, that leads me to my next question. But maybe I should throw out a clip just to give people a taste of what I love about his screenplay, and then we can dive into my question.
Call me tomorrow.
Hi.
Hey, Alan, did you see the playoffs last night?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good.
I was on my knees praying for that shot.
It worked.
All right, so here's my question. Boom, 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 boom. When discussing a comedy I love, it's always tempting to fall into the trap of just quoting it over and over again, a temptation I'm going to try and resist. On the other hand, if you get too analytical about comedy, it kind of falls to pieces and stops being funny. But that said, as I was rewatching the movie last night, I quite literally, at one point, I thought I dislocated a rib. I had to stop the movie and get up and kind of like massage myself back into place. I mean, I was just screaming with laughter. So what is it about his style of comedy? Because he does this amazing thing where like he's not writing jokes, but he's definitely satirizing a lot of human behavior that we're all too familiar with, like, that shit-eating grin that people put like this plaster on their face when they're in the workplace and so on and so forth. So like, help me understand what is his style of comedy and why is it so effective? And like, am I overpraising the screenplay? Because as I was watching last night, I was thinking like one of my favorite screenplays in the comedy genre.
If you're not familiar with his movies, or even if you are and you're watching this, you'd see that clip you just played, and it's like, why would you? What's the significance of that? And it's like, no, man, I'm telling you, like that kind of stuff. I live it for. I mean, I work inside a cubicle, and I also design office cubicles. So there's that little weird thing I got going for my life. But throughout my work career, like you have people come up and just assume that I watch a certain sport. And then sometimes we're all human. We do stuff. So it's like for years, I got caught up in like just agreeing with this guy. And he just assumed that I watched baseball. And I was like, yeah, man. Oh, what a game. And I was like, I've done that before. I'm not even lying. I can't stand baseball. I like going to baseball games. I'll go to one, but like watching it.
They're fun. Yeah.
I'll never watch one. It's the most boring game on television. But then like, so for a while, it was like, I guess I'm a Mets fan, which I guess my dad is from Queens, so those are the rules. I guess so. Technically, by birth, I'm a Mets fan, but like I've never been invested in the Mets.
Did you have a Darryl Strawberry poster on your wall as a kid?
No, I had cards. I definitely I had and Dwight Gooden, but no poster. No, baseball was just never my thing. But that kind it's this like there's levels to his comedy. That sounds so cliche, but it's just like. If you've been in a situation like that, it's one of those things where it's like, haha, I've been there before where I just kind of lied. And then it's just like, damn, that's kind of a sad existence. And then later on, it's like, it's a combination of, God, that's really sad, but that's also very funny. And then the two come together. Like I was going to say, between Dollhouse and Happiness, my teens, 20s, 30s, and 40s, those movies have a different, they're different each decade. Like you watch Happiness when you're a teenager. And that's how I got put onto it. Just like I imagine so many people, at least who are teenagers, like, oh, you got to see this movie. It's so messed up. And then like you watch it and you just laugh at certain things for the wrong reasons. And then the older you get, it's kind of like I still recognize this as a comedy, but there's some stuff that's like the what's on screen isn't funny, but the fact that it's there is the fact that Solondz had the audacity to put this in a movie, that's funny. And then by the time you get to your 30s, it's like it's like a combination of everything where it's just like, this is funny. I shouldn't be laughing at this, but what does that say about me? If I
I
find
think
it
it's
funny,
what
I find it
makes
funny.
the comedies endure, because if you can appreciate it on different levels, well, then people are going to laugh at it for different reasons. And sometimes people will come up to Todd Solondz at a festival screening and say, "Oh my God, I love this movie. I laughed so hard when this happened." And he's recoiling in horror,
Yeah,
recognizing, oh, like they're laughing at the idea that the character of Bill Maplewood is a serial rapist, and he's like, "Hey, like,
right.
you're not supposed to laugh at the fact that he's a serial rapist, but you're supposed to laugh at like other." But like that's what's beautiful about his comedy. He's not telling you how to laugh or why to laugh or when to laugh, but he is
Right.
being hilarious. But it's like, yeah, everybody's going to laugh at it for different reasons, and it allows it to be accessible on different levels to different people, because I've definitely talked to a variety of different types of people from different like world views that all love happiness if they've been exposed to it. So yeah, I applaud them for not spelling everything out for the audience about when they're supposed to politely applaud, because if you're politely applauding comedy, that's not comedy. That's something else.
Yeah,
Like
right.
if
No.
you go to a comedy club, you're supposed to hear laughter.
Right. No, and it's dangerous sometimes too, because there's certain things that are said that could be perceived as like, oh, this is racist, sexist, whatever, and you laugh. But I'm not necessarily always laughing at the actual. It's like, wow, you had the audacity to say. It's like, this is unbelievable. Like the unbelievability of something can be funny, not the actual joke or the insult or whatever. But just like, man, you really just said that. Like that is funny too. That's what I mean by this.
Along those
Levels to
lines,
the-
Dylan Baker in his interview here, he's talked about how
Yeah.
somebody in his building did a painting of him from the baseball scene, and Dylan Baker talked about how when he was playing the scene in his mind, he was thinking, "Oh, this poor, uncoordinated, unathletic kid, like he can't swing the bat, he's never gonna hit the ball, but maybe if I can just like give him an outpouring of emotion, I can like support him." And then other people were laughing hysterically or reacting in horror to a pedophile looking at a little boy. But here is the scene
Yeah.
in question. But even Dylan Baker realized, oh, like the audience might still love the scene for different reasons that are completely independent from the motivation or emotions that I'm feeling while playing the scene. And once again, that's a sign of a real storyteller or a real
Yeah,
artist
man.
or a real filmmaker.
Agreed. Yeah.
All right. Well, what do I got cooking in the oven for the next question? All right. So this question's in honor of our mutual friend, Tony Stella, who's one of the artists out there who is out there like fighting the good fight every day, preserving the art of movie posters as an art form, not just as marketing materials. And along those lines, what do you think of this Flicks poster designed by the legendary Daniel Clowes? Because Daniel Clowes, for people who don't know, wrote and drew Ghost World, one of the coolest indie comics of the 1990s. And for me, when they had Daniel Clowes do the poster for this movie, it's somehow like, we're talking like indie rock or indie comics or indie movies, but there's something about like the independent spirit. It just seemed like pitch perfect. Like you would get this like groundbreaking indie artist to do your poster. But any strong feelings about the decline of movie poster art or what they were able to achieve with this poster?
Well, the happiness, I think it's iconic, at this point, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier. What kind of started that rant, my early Pinland Empire rant that Ted Hope shared a long time ago, was like that poster. Welcome to the Dollhouse as well, but that poster really it kicked off a lot of like late '90s, early 2000s American indie, like,
And like the beads of sweat coming down Philip Seymour Hoffman's forehead. I mean,
and I'm glad you brought, because Ghost World is one of those movies, and you already said it. Daniel Clowes did the artwork for the movie adaptation of his own book, and then him and Zweigoff worked together again for a movie that wasn't as good, Art School Confidential, but still, like, you saw Daniel Clowes do like a handful of movie posters, post Happiness, and a lot of movie posters and artwork started to kind of like, I'm not gonna say copy, but definitely inspired by that. There was a few year period where it was like, it kind of looked, it's like from the school of Happiness or from the school of Todd Solondz / Daniel Clowes artwork. You know what I mean? So.
Well, so what I love about this Blu-ray release is they didn't fuck with the poster. They just let the poster be. What I can't stand is when you have a movie that has an amazing poster, there's a new Blu-ray release, and they'll take just like a crummy still and add some like stupid special effects to it. I'm like, there's already a work of art that you could use. Why, like,
Agreed.
When I bought Death Wish recently, and I posted like, oh, fresh addition to my physical media library, and David Lambert pointed out, like, not only is that image not from Death Wish, he's wielding a gun which he doesn't get until Death Wish 3. So why are they using that image on like the Death Wish Blu-ray release? And it's like, does anybody actually watch these movies, or actually like I think it's often has a problem where people aren't getting high on their own supply. And I feel like if you're going to be involved in making Blu-ray releases or making movie releases or whatever, like, you need to find people who actually are paying attention to the details and actually enjoy this stuff, because it just seems like so many people are asleep at the wheel and just don't give a fuck.
Have you ever seen the DVD cover art for Valhalla Rising?
Well, I don't think so. Maybe. Is it just the one of Mads Mikkelsen looking off to the side, or what, with the shirt off? Or
there's another one.
We're getting invaded. Bring on Nate Dogg. You're about to go on YouTube. So, never mind.
Fun. There's another one. There's another one that's floating around where it's clearly like someone took 300 and just altered it a little bit.
Oh,
Made
God.
it say Valhalla Rising. No, literally, it's like a Spartan body with Mads Mikkelsen's head on it, and it's like Valhalla Rising, but with that 300 font. It's really kind of like embarrassing and just gives the wrong idea of what the movie's about. But to be fair, the original trailer to Valhalla Rising kind of misleading
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a weird phenomenon when people try to advertise the movie in a way it doesn't represent the movie. Like, we see a lot of trailers these days for movies that are musicals, where they try to hide the fact that the movie's a musical. It's like, well, first of all, if you have to hide the fact that you're a musical, maybe you should not have made a musical.
Right.
But also, at least lean into it. Like, don't hide it. But anyway, movie marketing is a strange art that is in bad shape these days.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's dig into some of the characters in this story. And for me, like, there are a lot of incredible characters in this movie, but it's tough to beat good old Jared Harris, son of Richard Harris, playing Vlad. And this is one of my favorite lines from the movie.
Don't you miss Russia?
Fucking the Count of Russia.
Well, I guess it's best to feel that way.
And what I love about his character in this is how he loves New Jersey. Like, even wears a T-shirt. I love New Jersey. Like, there's nobody in this movie who loves New Jersey more, and that's kind of an ongoing gag throughout this. Is how some people live in New Jersey. Ironically, like Laura Flynn Boyle's character, she's like, people always laugh when I tell them I live in New Jersey, but they just don't get it. I'm living in a state of irony, but he has an unironic love of New Jersey, and I just love how, like, he's not Russian, but he's putting on this outrageous Russian accent, and also it ties into Todd Solondz' own career, where he did actually teach English to a lot of immigrants for a while as a part-time job, just to kind of help survive back in the early 90s. So it all comes from his own life experience.
Yeah, he taught abroad a few years ago. He taught in Singapore, also. So random.
We want Marsha.
Yeah, no, like, even that, like, that's another scene where it really tests you, because it's like these, you have to watch what you say sometimes about migrants, especially migrants of color. But no matter how you cut it, they're being assholes in the scene, and it's like, man, you know what? It's like, you don't want to say the wrong thing, but it's like, you're really forcing me. I don't want to say something out of turn, but it's like, that's
when you need a crazy Russian in the classroom, like, hey, just shut everybody down. But anyway, that scene, like, the whole class turns on her in the most venomous fashion in seconds. We want Marsha.
Yeah.
Oh God, it just fucking makes me howl. And it's like, yeah, I mean, if people are going to be worried at all about laughing at the wrong thing, this movie is just going to be a radioactive wasteland filled with landmines. Like, because it's impossible to watch it and not laugh. And if you're at all sensitive to what you're laughing at, well, then, yeah, you're going to just be filled with self-loathing after watching this movie.
Right. No, agreed.
But it does have its sweet moments. What I love about this movie is that it'll have these incredibly tender scenes, or incredibly sad scenes, or just incredibly just like emotional, almost like overwrought scenes. And then you're like, oh my God, I can't believe how serious and sincere this movie is becoming. And then it always has a gag which totally undoes it. Like when the scene between Dylan Baker and his son sobbing, and his father's crying, and he's saying the most horrible, like, confessions imaginable. And the son's like, would you fuck me? And he's like, no, I just jerk off. Like, and it turns into the darkest line of the entire fucking movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to get demonetized just by quoting this movie. But yet another scene along those lines is this one, also starring Jared Harris.
by my window, waiting for someone to sing me her song.
So we get this amazing date night where he offers to drive her back to New Jersey, and he picks up her guitar and he's like, "Oh, love songs," and he's like, "I play," and he plays this song. They end up boning down, as Bill Scurry would say, and he's like, "Are you okay?" She's like, "Yeah." He's like, "I go now," and he just vanishes. Yeah. And I think either that night or later on, steals her guitar and steals her stereo. So it's like she's been looking for love and happiness and sex and a man the entire movie. She finally has her big moment, and once again, Todd Solondz has to turn it all into an elaborate gag.
See, now that's before I don't know if you were recording yet, but when you were saying like, "Oh, you couldn't make this kind of movie because of the humor," I feel like that kind of stuff people would shy away from, where it's just like, whatever, we're not going to get all topical and political, but, like with migrants in this country, but to still have a movie where it's like, yeah, he steals her shit. You know what I mean? Like that's still very funny to me. Like it's messed up, but also funny. You know what I'm saying?
And she comes to visit him and he's like, "All right, this is very humiliating for me, but I need to borrow money. I need to borrow $1,000. She's like, "Oh, that's a lot of money." He's like, "Well, $500. She's like, "All right, but you have to give me back my guitar and my stereo." And she's looking at her stuff and he's like, "Deal."
Yeah.
He thinks about it a second, but he's he's been caught red-handed. But I love how he's so proud of being a thief and how he was independent back in Russia. He's like, "But of course I had many offers." Like this fact that he's proud of being unaffiliated with the Russian mafia. Just such a fantastic character.
Yeah. Now she has a rough go at that job, because then eventually his wife finds him there and she attacks her. Like, it's like that. And that's another thing too. All the the tough stuff that happens to that character specifically, because she's such a naive, sweet person, and it's
She's
just
an open
all this
wound.
terrible, literally all this terrible stuff happens to her.
Yeah. She wants to do good, and as Lara Flynn Boyle, her sister, says, she doesn't need to do good. She is good, and it's people like Lara Flynn Boyle who are very selfish, who probably need to occasionally do some good. But I love Lara Flynn Boyle in this movie. I mean, obviously everybody loves her in Twin Peaks and things like that, but I feel like maybe is I guess not world weird, but maybe the most cynical character in this movie in a lovable way. And I have a great clip where she's discussing the murder of Pedro in Philip Seymour Hoffman's building, and just the way she breaks down the crime is just fucking hilarious.
Anyway, so the police came and looked in her freezer and found baggies filled with the doorman's genitals.
I use baggies.
Me too.
Everyone uses baggies. That's why we can all relate to this crime, don't you see?
I'm gonna dislocate another rib just by watching these clips again. It's something about that deadpan delivery style where it's like sincere and wanting to see the positive, but at the same time disgusting a guy's genitals being in a woman's freezer. I feel like she was tailor-made to work with Todd Solondz. There's certain actors or actresses where they seem to really be on somebody's wavelength. It's like when Aubrey Plaza showed up in Ned Rifle for Hal Hartley. It's like, it's a shame she wasn't born 20 years earlier so that she could have been in all of his 90s movies, because she's just so clearly right on his wavelength. And I feel like Lara Flynn Boyle the same. She's right on Todd Solondz' wavelength.
So, going back, there's good that scene you showed was just another example too of good comedic timing throughout Happiness. There's a lot of I'm not gonna say directly Robert Altman type stuff, but Robert Altman adjacent stuff. One of my favorite scenes, weird to say favorite, but when John Lovitz's mother calls, Jane Addams at work, and she's already having a terrible, that's what's funny. She's already having a terrible day, and she's like, "I hope you fucking burn in rotten hell," and then hangs up the phone. And then she's just for a second, she doesn't even cry right away. She's just like, Jesus Christ, she's just stunned. And her coworkers in the background are still trying to figure out that actor's name. "Oh, dude, something. You know what I mean?
It's fucking funny. The background conversations that Solondz will embrace or unveil, where it's he's reveling in their terrible taste in TV, or their terrible taste in music, or their terrible taste in movies, or just their complete lack of sensitivity. The fact that people die on a regular basis throughout this movie and no one can even remember them. Like when Philip Seymour Hoffman's neighbor comes to tell him about ostensibly comes to tell him about the death of Pedro, but really she's trying to invite him to the playoffs. But she's like, "Pedro's dead." And he's like, "Who?" And anyway, but nobody can remember anybody. It's so honest, but brutally honest. How like everybody likes to put on a big show, but how invested they were and how much they love somebody, blah blah blah. But she's like, I mean, I said hello to him, I think, or I hope so. Like anyway, I find the movie to be so refreshingly honest, and in like in a world of fakers and charlatans and just people that are completely totally superficial.
Yeah, like that character, his neighbor, who eventually, she's the one who's attacked by Pedro. It's like she's very sad too, because he makes a point to like after the door gets closed on her, she just like walks away all sad, and she's just very lonely like that. Like that's
we don't
like,
know at that point that she's a murderer.
Right.
We know,
right.
and that she's been slowly but surely getting rid of his body parts a little bit at a time. Yeah. Your heart goes out to her, but that's a joke or I guess a setup. It takes a long time to pay off because the entire movie we feel nothing but sympathy for her, and just like this huge outpouring of emotion. And then she's like, when she starts describing what she did to him and after she broke his neck, well, then it turns the whole movie upside down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, speaking of Philip Seymour Hoffman, I've got another great classic Philip Seymour Hoffman moment where he finally decides, after years upon years of living next door to Laura Flynn Boyle, he finally decides to give her a call.
Hello?
I know who you are, and you are nothing. You think you are fucking something, but you are fucking nothing. You are empty. You are a zero. You are a black hole, and I'm gonna fuck you so bad you're gonna be coming out of your ears.
You're laughing. Yeah. It's impossible not to laugh at this fucking movie, no matter how fucked up and sadistic it gets.
No, I agree. He's so
Philip Seymour Hoffman, apparently, when he was auditioning for the role, every actor auditioning for this movie, they wanted that part. Nobody wanted the part of the pedophile. They all wanted Philip Seymour Hoffman's character. Sure. But when Todd Solondz shook hands with them at the end of the audition, apparently Philip Seymour Hoffman had a wet, clammy hand. He's like, I found my guy. Yeah, wet, clammy hands. That tells me all I need to know about you. And apparently Philip Seymour Hoffman was like impeccably professional, always incredibly well prepared, just a joy to work with.
Sure. No, I believe that. That's another thing too. It's like that's another thing too, this ensemble cast. There's like still so many folks we haven't even touched on yet. You know what I mean?
Gazzara, one of Bill Tech's favorites. Ben Gazzara, baby.
We haven't gotten to the third sister who is subtly like one of my least favorite characters. Like she's a frustrating person also. But anyway, no, this is one of like the defining Philip Seymour Hoffman movies, because it's like for a year, especially in the 90s, he made a career out of, even in this, he's a supporting character. This was kind of like his breakout, thing.
Yeah, this and Boogie Nights. I guess Boogie Nights came out the year before, or maybe right around the same time. But if you were following independent film and or indie adjacent movies, like bigger budgeted movies that still had that indie spirit, suddenly Philip Seymour Hoffman was everywhere.
And he was also in another, an important, well, some people call it Sydney, others call it Hard Eight. He's literally in one scene.
Yep.
But it's like it's one of my favorite movies, favorite scenes, in that movie. And then Talented Mr. Ripley, that's not an indie movie, but he kind of steals the show in that. So it's like, I think they were all kind of building up to Happiness. And then, think about it, post Happiness, he was off, because he had Magnolia after that. And then he finally started starring in movies more. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, a true legend, gone way too soon. I mean, when he died, it was just fucking awful, and just hearing about how and the way he was found and so on and so forth. But you just think like he probably would have given us 30 to 40 more years of great movies. Someone like Ben Gazzara. I mean, Ben Gazzara's character in this, he's got this incredible line in here. And we want to talk about comedic timing. He's spending time with another woman after he and his wife have gotten separated, and she's complaining about like, I got to get out of here. I'm suffocating. Like all the women are pathetic gossips, and the men are. And then Ben Gazzara finishes her sentence, just pathetic. And the way he says just pathetic, like his character is so interesting because he's as healthy as an ox. He's got this great heart. He's got this big, great family, financial independence, et cetera, and so forth. And the only thing he's told is like, if you stay off the salt, you'll live to be 100. And at the end of the movie, we see him just pouring all of his food, surrounded by all of his daughters and his mother and his grandkids and that sort of thing. And I love how bitter and over it he is. And
so like, he's such a good, like practical, like dad character too. Cause like, after he has that fight with his wife and then like his daughter gets on the phone. He's like, "Are you and mom getting divorced?" He's like, "What are you telling the kids?" Like that kind of, he's such a good. Yeah, I can. Oh God, I can quote so many random things from this movie.
That's the thing. It's like it's not a movie where you're like quoting knock jokes, but you can't help but feel compelled to quote line after line. I feel like it's one of those movies like The Big Lebowski, obviously very different in tone and style, but people just want to quote all kinds of random lines from the movie. And I feel like I'd kind of forgotten just how quotable this movie is and how like the whole movie is really just, it starts with the screenplay. And apparently Todd Solondz he loves writing, but he hates shooting. He just wants the productions out of his hands, and he's having to deal with schedules and budgets and losing the light and losing scenes or losing locations. Just the stress and the ordeal of shooting really wears him down. But at least if you have a great screenplay, like, you don't have to do rewrites at night and that sort of thing. Like the heavy lifting's all been done in advance. And then luckily, if you get a great cast, they will always make you look like a better writer. And that's one of the things he mentions on this Blu-ray. If you cast the right actors in your roles, all of them will make you appear to be a better screenwriter than you actually are. But it makes you wonder, like, what if Dylan Baker had never walked into that audition? Like, would the movie even be what it is? Because the whole movie hinges on his ability to sell the character of Bill Maplewood as somebody who is a monster and a serial rapist, but also a loving father who gives his son like fatherly advice about masturbation and all this stuff, like, and even kind of like punches him on the shoulder, like encouraging him to come and that sort of thing. But like, help me unpack what makes this this tightrope walk work, because even Todd Solondz told him, said, look, this part, you're going to be standing on the edge of a knife the entire movie, and it'll be very easy to fall either way, but we need to stay right on the edge of the blade. But like, why does his performance in this character work as well as it does? Because I feel like nowadays he would just be the monster, but he would not also be the love.
Right. I think, I think it's his look. I think if there was like a bigger name or a more recognizable actor, that would make less impactful. Like, I don't know, from all my years of playing sports, it's like, and dads come to pick their kids up, like Dylan Baker looks like half of the dads that like I saw growing up. So I think it's a big part of like that, the wardrobe, how he looks, his tone, the way, like, he's pretty. He's very even keeled throughout the majority of, mostly except for that, like, one, like the scene at the end where he's crying and talking to his son. And then, the other scene where he's like putting something in the kid's food and he gets a little nervous. But for the most part, he's just such a like even keeled guy. And I think that's what makes
And for the first half of the movie, it's all in his mind. It's like his own private little fetish that he has not yet acted on. And another interesting tidbit from the Blu-ray, when he asked Todd Solondz, should I go and speak to convicted pedophiles to do research? And Solondz said, no, if you talk to them, they've already been caught, or they've already been reformed, or they already have like learned the error of their ways. You don't know the error of your ways yet. You're still at this point where it's like this private little thing that's kind of eating away at your insides, which you see like in that scene where he drives to the gas station. He's kind of sweating and looking around desperately, buys that little kid's mag, which he later sees on his son's floor. And like we see him in the back of his car as like a mother and her kids are like popping in the car. I mean, it is so savage and so ruthless. And I remember we were watching this in, it must have been my apartment, my fourth year at UVA, but I was watching with my friends, and one of them looked over at me and goes, Jamie, what's happening? I was like, I don't know. I was like, I have no idea where this movie is going, but we were petrified.
I had a similar, in college, I loaned the DVD I loaned the DVD out twice. Once, like, my buddy called me, like, it was like still playing. He was like, what the hell is this? Like, you know what I mean? And then another time in the architectural studio, I lent it to one of like the lower classmen, and I could hear them in the other room. I was like, they're all gathered on a laptop watching happen. I could just tell. And then they all came in and they're like, yo, what the hell? Like, so I've had similar, yeah.
Well, also because the movie tricks you. It occasionally does present him as like father knows best, or my three sons, like your classic sitcom dad. And there's, speaking of great sitcom transitions, like right after he's in the back of the car, just unleashing hell on his body, the transition is so jarring. And here it is.
What's going on?
Like that scene taken in isolation, totally harmless. Oh, that's your classic kind of sitcom intro. The music cues, you hear the oven bell ring, blah, blah, blah. But we, the audience, have seen what's lurking beneath the surface with the scene that came right beforehand. And I think that's what's incredible about this movie is the way he's able to be so sincere as a sitcom and as this horrible, I don't know even know how to describe the actual subplot of what he's doing. But anyway, like the contrast of the scenes is quite upsetting to a lot of people.
It's funny. I am as you play that scene and as you're talking, I imagine someone, because this used to come on cable a lot. They used to play this on the Sundance Channel all the time. And I just imagine someone like starting the movie like at that scene. You know what I mean? Like when he comes home and then keep watching, and then later on they're like, "Whoa, what the hell?" You know what I mean? I just imagine, yeah.
Yeah, and as an actor, I just think you have to be. It's like have like balls of steel to play this role. It's a little bit like what was the film that Bill Sage did with Greg Araki? Was Mysterious?
Oh my God,
Spin?
Mysterious. That's
but
another.
If you're willing to
film.
go there and play those kinds of roles, like for an actor, it's an amazing opportunity. But a lot of people can't separate reality from performance, or like a fantasy versus real life, and they would just think of you as that person for the rest of your career. So it's like Dylan Baker, or he was not Brad Pitt or Robert De Niro going into this. He was a relatively unknown actor, and he just basically took his entire career and rolled the dice. But I think the day he dies, this is the movie people are going to talk about.
I absolutely agree, because prior to the only thing I remembered him from besides before this was he's the brother in Who's Harry Crumb.
Gotcha.
He keeps like getting poisoned, and he just looks more hideous as the movie continuously goes on. That's like the gag in the movie. But and I also he shows up all the time. He was obviously I think
he works.
Was rumored at one point he was supposed to be at some point a villain in the Spider-Man, because he was the scientist in Spider-Man. I think there was some.
Yeah, he played the Lizard. He was the original version of the Lizard in Spider-Man 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And then they ended up doing a terrible version of the Lizard in Amazing Spider-Man. But he would have been, is it Kurt Connors? Is that the name of the doctor who becomes the Lizard, or the Lizard? Hang on, I'm gonna have my Marvel fan card revoked. Right. The Lizard, Kurt Connors. Let's see if I was right. Dr. Curtis Connors is the actual name, but yes, not Lizard Man. It is the Lizard, but he's one of the classic old school villains. But they were actually planting those seeds. And the reason he starts experimenting on himself is that he doesn't have an arm, and he knows that lizards can regenerate. So he's trying to regenerate his arm like a lizard, and ends up turning into an actual lizard, but was a great recurring character in Marvel Comics for fucking decades. But he was pitch perfect casting. And he has that great scene in in Spider-Man 2, when Peter Parker's making all these excuses, and he's like, "Get it done, or I'm failing you." And it's like that great tough love bit. But he was incredible in that movie.
But the thing is about happiness, it's like you're saying, this is his like defining role. But like when this movie came out, it was a big deal. It caused a lot of waves, but it wasn't like, oh, after this, oh, now he's going to be in all these Paul Thomas Anderson movies. Now he's going to be in Christopher Nolan. Like, you still don't like. It wasn't this movie that made him like a leading man still, because it's like, what do you do with it? You know what I mean? Like this amazing lightning in a bottle performance, but it's like,
how do you cast him in anything without people thinking about this scene?
Right,
and like,
exactly.
I think one of the most horrifying scenes that he plays to perfection. The second time he goes out and commits one of his crimes, like it's very deliberate. When he comes home, you can see that he's like, even like shaken down to his core. Like he's disgusted with himself, and he's just kind of shattered by what he just did. But he goes up to his son's room, and once again, Todd Solondz can juggle several flaming batons at once. But while he's experiencing all this self-revulsion, he looks with such tenderness and affection at his son. But of course, because it's Todd Solondz, he can't just have the father to his best moment. There has to be a little porno mag sticking out from underneath the pillow of his son, as you will see in the following clip. Look closely. Like if this were some cheesy Gary Marshall movie, or some dumbass movie like Pay It Forward, like all those nauseating feel-good movies that I think for people who didn't live through the late 90s, they won't even know these kinds of movies exist, about like the really sugary, sweet, saccharine, like prestige dramas. In those kinds of movies, you would have these kinds of scenes where the father's looking affectionately at his son and pets his head and puts him to bed. But because it's Todd Solondz, of course, there have to be some titties sticking out from underneath the pillow, which makes you still laugh in spite of all the mixed emotions you're feeling at that time.
Right. Yeah. No, even when Ben Gazzara has his little fling with the neighbor, and he's like, I can't feel anything. Like she quickly looks down. Like it's like
well, she says, don't
like
feel
that.
guilty. And he says, I don't feel
I don't
anything.
feel anything. Yeah. And then she like looks down at yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, I have to take a quick whiz. I'm going to play my wrong reel pee break. It's going to be a 2-minute break, but we'll be right back. But for the time being, enjoy the soothing sounds of the Super Nintendo Shadowrun. All right, we are back. Well, I've got one last official question, and then we can open up the conversation to anything and everything related to Todd Solondz that you want to discuss. But I always try to avoid getting too nostalgic about the indie craze of the 90s, but it's hard not to just because I was a teenager in my early 20s. But there were so many low-budget filmmakers like David O. Russell or Christopher Guest or Neil LaBute or Hal Hartley making not only comedies, but like a wide array of different types of comedy. Whereas these days you're lucky if you get any comedies, but like in the 90s, we truly had like just like a really rich like range of diverse different kinds of comedies to enjoy. But I also don't want to create a distorted view of that period, because even then a movie like Happiness was a bit of a tough sell for some moviegoers. The movie was made, like I think we said before we started recording, it was made for like 2 million. Yeah, made for 2.2 million, and then it grossed 5.7 million. So we're still talking about like the world of low budget filmmaking. But I feel like they're also like, you know, there are plenty of people at that time where they're happy just to stick with There's Something About Mary or Happy Gilmore or Cable Guy or American Pie. And I'm not knocking those kinds of movies, but do you have any mind-blowing insights for me as to why the comedy genre seemed to thrive so intensely right at that time and place? And why a filmmaker like Todd Solondz really got lucky, where like it seems like in terms of, I feel like luck is when opportunity meets preparation, but like his entire life had been building up to the late 90s, where like the type of comedy that was in vogue at that time was the perfect kind of comedy that he knew how to deliver. So like what was in the water at this period that allowed Todd Solondz to thrive? Whereas now, you know, he struggles to get his movies going.
I think, well, that's two things. Well, as far as the reason why it was successful, I do think Gen X was a big part of it. I technically Todd Solondz might be first generation Gen X, but I think like the diversity that Generation X was, like they ran the 90s. And I think like variety and just kind of
he was born in 59, so technically he's a boomer. I think Gen X starts in 63, so he's one of the last of the boomers.
Wow, okay.
But well, I'm Gen X all the way, 1976, baby, proud Gen Xer.
Well, I mean, he's just pre-Gen X, and I think a lot of what I just think that era was just like ripe for the picking or taking. I'm not sure what term to use, but yeah, I just think variety, and I think I think after a couple of like, you know, between like Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, I think folks didn't mind taking a risk, especially considering budgets of things too.
Yeah.
I think
$2 million we're
you know,
talking about.
right. And you know, nowadays, I look. I'll even take your timeline that you were saying, and I'll even I think in the early 2000s we had a lot of good comedies too. I think around mid 2000s, I think that's when it really started dying, because there was a lot of the, especially working in a video store, a lot of the comedies went to like direct to video. You know, it would be like American Pie 6, you know, like Stifler's brother gets his own side movie, or like you know, Dodgeball 2, but it didn't star anybody from the original. It was like there was a lot of like throwaway movies, and I think there was clearly a profit there. So I think a lot. What's that?
I'm waving a tan.
Oh. I think there was a lot of like, it's like, well, we'll just focus all this comedy on the like no budget direct to DVD or
but there were
direct to video,
gems in that
know?
world, like stuff like American Movie, which is a documentary that's also one of the greatest comedies ever made.
Yeah.
Or like weird documentaries like Windy City Heat, where it's like, is it a documentary? Is it a
oh my
film?
God. That movie is so, oh my God, I love that movie so much. Yeah,
it's
Bobcat
fucking hysterical, but like it's a weird
movie.
hybrid movie, but like it really was like a true golden age. And I feel like no matter what kind of comedies you're into, like, you know, movies like Fear of a Black Hat in the 1990s, like nothing like Fear of a Black Hat gets made in the 2020s. Like no one goes anywhere near something like that. And so
it's funny. Fear of a Black Hat came up in my mind during this past Oscars, because, you know, the guy that wrote and directed American Fiction, he was talking about, you know, the current state of black film, and just like a lot of, when people saw American Fiction, a lot of people were like, oh, finally a movie like this, and then it had me thinking back, and it was just like, no, man, like the 80s and 90s, we actually there were a lot more diverse black points of view than there are now. You know what I mean?
Like Bill Cosby and Eddie Murphy were superstars at the same time, one in TV, one in movies, but like very different styles of comedy. And obviously very different people, but like they were superstars at the same. It's like, it wasn't like there was like only room in the culture for like one superstar.
That's what I'm saying. But they also existed at the same time as like a guy like Wendell B. Harris, or Melvin Van Peebles was over in Europe, or Mario Van Peebles, his son. Like there was Bill Duke was super active in the 90s. There's not that much like now. I think, you know, if you would have asked me this years ago, I wouldn't have said it. But nowadays I do. I think it's a lot of like political and social things have got people uptight. I know that sounds like such a silly thing to say, but that's all I come back to. It's just like worry about offending something, or just like
they need to hear that bit of advice from Blazing Saddles. Gentlemen, unclench your sphincters. Everyone needs to unclench their sphincters.
I agree. Like, you know, I know this isn't about the current state of black film, but so many black films, there's some message behind it. And the few times when there isn't, people like critics and fans make it that, even when that was never the intention. And I just think that so long story short,
bring back I'm going to get you, sucker, and stuff like that.
I just wonder if the fun has been taken out of stuff in general, like going back to comedy. I don't know.
But here's what's crazy. I go to a lot of comedy clubs, and I go to comedy clubs in New York. I go to comedy clubs in Austin, Texas, Los Angeles, wherever. I love stand-up comedy. Sure. The audience for rough, profane, disgusting, truly depraved comedy still exists, because I went to the Mothership in Austin back in July with my little brother. I didn't even know people could think of the things that they were saying, much less say them out loud in public. And people were falling out of their chairs screaming. I was like, whoa, the audience is still maybe even, I would maybe even make a case that the audience is more primed for comedy than ever before, because they get so little of it. They crave it. And it's like a unique opportunity right now. The first person who's willing to kill all the sacred cows and make some comedies that are like, make fun of every single thing that people aren't allowed to make fun of at their workplace or at their school, it's going to be a total sensation. And if nobody's willing to make that movie or write that book, they're definitely going to be stand-up comedians like, I don't give a fuck. Nobody's got, because you put your phone in a pouch before you go in. Nobody can record you. All they can do is just tell people what you said, which is, you know, who cares? But yeah, every great comedy club, they make you seal up your recording devices before you go in.
Because my whole thing is like, I don't know, man. In the 60s, like, the civil rights movement existed. There was anti-Semitism. There was, you know, the fight for feminism. But it's like, there were still like dirty
Still like
comics
Richard
that
Pryor.
existed. That,
Yeah.
but like that's what George Carlin, Lenny Bruce. Like that's what I'm saying. Like I'm not, right, exactly. So it's like I'm just wondering what that I haven't been able to pinpoint, because it's like, people were getting hoses shot on them, back then, but there were still comedians. I think the whole thing is, I think it's about how good you are at doing comedy. Because like I'll tell something, like, for example, if there's like a joke that's at the expense of Black people, if it's funny, I'll laugh. Like if you're clearly just, I want an excuse to be racist, like I'll be able to tell and I'm not going to laugh. But if it's like, if you're making fun of someone that looks like me, but it's still clever and funny, like I'll laugh. And I just, I think there just needs, I guess, to be more of that.
Neil Brennan had this great line once where he's been interviewed about his days working with Dave Chappelle on the Chappelle Show. But there was some line where he said, imagine, and he said this obviously in jest, but he said, imagine how much funnier Richard Pryor would have been if he had had liberal bloggers to guide him. And I was like, yes, I mean, you've gotten to the root of the matter.
Right,
like,
right, exactly.
People who don't like to laugh, who permanently have a scowl on their face, they have the audacity to judge and or advise legendary comedians or great writers or filmmakers how to tell jokes, which is just like the joke's on them, because people that are funny, like it stays funny forever. Happiness will still be hilarious 50 years from now, just as much as it was back in 1998.
I agree. And the writing was on the. I should have seen it coming, because people look at me like I'm crazy, but like I used to listen to Opie and Anthony a lot, and it always connected with Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn, and that early 2000s show that was on Comedy Central. And the responses to those, I was like, oh, like I should, like, in retrospect, it's like, oh, it's coming. So it's like something's coming, because the stuff they used to say was like
the clamp down,
right? But that was like, oh man, this might, wow, ooh, you know what I mean? So now, like 20 years ago, it's like, oh, something. I don't know.
There will be a Lenny Bruce, a new version of Lenny Bruce, because when Lenny Bruce, like you watch his comedy now and you're like, what is this? But like he did open a ton of doors that Richard Pryor and George Carlin and all these people that came after him boldly walked through and really took advantage of this new period of freedom. There will be a Lenny Bruce equivalent, like a true like comedy radical who will come along and blow the doors off all over again. Because before Lenny Bruce, people were still doing take my wife jokes, like,
right,
like,
right, yeah,
and like the comedy was very, very different. There are not a lot of like stand-up comedians from the 50s that where people like are listening to now, but after Lenny Bruce, it was just like this comedy golden age. So I always choose, maybe naively so, to remain a perpetual optimist. And once again, comedy exists. It's just you find it in different places. Or a show like Succession, it's not a comedy, but it was viciously funny. So if you look far and wide, you will find the vicious comedy in unlikely places.
I'm telling you right now, of one of my greatest laughs, and like I think one of the funniest things, TV, film, whatever, was after Logan Roy's funeral, when they recorded his youngest son's crying and like had it on his phone. Like, see, stuff like that. Like, exactly. Like, again, Succession isn't a comedy, but stuff like that is very hilarious. So yeah.
The savage side. Well, speaking of comedy, I've got one final clip which will help us start wrapping up this conversation. But it wraps up the movie, but it perfectly sums up everything about this movie. So here we go.
To happiness.
To happiness.
To happiness.
Cookie.
Cookie.
I came.
Now I chickened out. I didn't include like the few seconds right before that. But what is the joke at the core of the fact that the dog Cookie is kissing the mother on the lips?
Oh well, yeah. He like he said, he just ejaculated, but he was watching a woman, and he splatters on the rail, and the dog comes and licks it up, and then goes and kisses the mother, which is like.
I mean, the first time I saw the movie, when I saw the dog kissing the mother, I mean, I screamed in horror and delight. I was like, "Oh no!"
Right, and like he just lets that scene play out in the hands of it. Look, I'm not one of these Adam Sandler haters, but that is like, if you describe that on paper, that sounds like something that would happen in like an Adam Sandler movie, or like in Mallrats, and like there'd be this wacky music behind it. It would be edited and cut. There'd be a million cuts, a million different ways to like force you to laugh. But like that scene is just like dog comes up, kiss, and it's like there's no music, there's nothing to tell you how to feel. It's almost like a quiet scene too. You know what I mean? But it still works.
Yeah, and Adam Sandler, his prime came along at the perfect time because I was like in eighth or ninth grade when like that crop of like Chris Rock and Chris Farley and David Spade and all of them were like, you know, like almost like they're almost like a gang within Saturday Night Live. But then suddenly Sandler had his comedy albums that would be released on CD, like, you know, just performing the Hanukkah song and things like that. And then suddenly Billy Madison and Happy Gilmore and Wedding Singer and all these movies came out in a row, and he became this massive star. But like Billy Madison, I must have watched it 50 to 100 times in college, and we would laugh like knuckleheads every single time. The movie is hysterical. I like low comedy. I like high comedy. I like dark comedy. I like every kind of comedy imaginable. All that matters with comedy is, does it make you laugh? Because we can analyze and psychoanalyze and break down and discuss and, you know, unpack all day long. But if you don't laugh, like what are we even talking about? And Happiness, holy shit balls. I mean, Mark Kermit's always talking about the 6 laugh test, that a movie needs to let you, like, you need to laugh out loud involuntarily 6 times. Well, this movie passes like the 600 laugh test. It's just fucking insane.
I also have another personal laugh test too, where like, comedy, I don't care if it's a wacky, silly, satirical, dark, whatever. When you see the trailer, a lot of times they put in what I like to call, you know, like the big laughs, because they're trying to sell the movie. But it's all the stuff that like wouldn't be in the and not even like stuff that's like profanity laced, just like the little stuff that like would be pointless to put in a trailer, but like when you watch it, it just makes you, you know what I mean? Like that's what I think that's what makes something like Office Space. Like nothing in that trailer to me are even like the funniest things in that movie. And just like in Happiness, like there's so many just like little things that like out of context, like what is the point of this?
The trailer for Happiness was so misleading. I didn't see it in the theater. I saw the trailer. I was like, what is this? Looks fucking weird. And so I skipped it. And then I just happened to rent it on, I think on VHS or DVD. Anyway, I rented it my final year in college. And I was like, how did I miss this in the theater? It blew my mind, but the trailer fucked me up and it sent me down the wrong path.
Yeah.
All right. Well, just a way of wrapping things up. Give people kind of, I guess, your personal favorites of Todd Solondz films. He's only got like 7 or 8 to speak of, but like I feel like he had the hot streak of Welcome to the Dollhouse, Happiness, and Storytelling, which is very tough to beat. Is that the peak, or do you have some dark horse favorites? Like where do you rank Storytelling related or relative to his earlier 2 movies? Because obviously Storytelling was in its own way even more controversial than Happiness, where he had to be censored with a big giant red box because it was
an entire, it was supposed to be 3 stories. One wasn't even put in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
I think that wasn't the third story was removed voluntarily, but the red box was his way of basically saying, I'm being censored like we're in Saudi Arabia or something.
Right. Well, even the scene, all of the dialogue within that story in the writing class when they're talking, like that's just so clearly Todd Solondz addressing critics from Happiness. Yeah. It's just so super obvious. The thing is, you know, I got to be honest. I mean, Storytelling wasn't really that successful, so I don't know. But it's a movie I like, so it's one of those things where it's like, am I a Storytelling defender, or is it just a movie I like? Because that started the downfall. Because like after rewatching Palindromes, look, it definitely has that Todd Solondz sensibility, and there's stuff in it that's clever. But I still don't like that movie.
The song the kids perform.
Oh well, yeah, but that whole segment
might be peak Todd Solondz. That the way it's performed, like only he knows how to create a scene like that.
But like stepping back and look at the whole picture, it's like, nah, I'm sorry, man, I just don't think this works. And I had this, and Life During Wartime was another one where it was just kind of like, so what, you're doing a sequel to?
For people who don't know, Life During Wartime was a 2009 film, a direct sequel to Happiness, but all the actors were recast, or all the characters were recast. I don't think it quite works. It definitely doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. I don't think so. Yeah. And then, you know, it's funny. I got confused for a second because you said, what's your dark horse favorite? And I was like, oh, yeah, wait, he directed a movie called
Dark Horse, 2011, baby.
Completely forgot about.
Which is actually kind of funny.
You know?
Like when back in the early days of Wrong Reel, when I was still recording with my original co-founders, I remember before we were going to do an episode, I can't remember what the episode was, but I was deathly ill, where I had like projectile diarrhea coming out my mouth and my ass at the same time. I was just like lying on the couch, just like, but I did a Todd Solondz like retrospective where I watched his entire career. No filmmaker has ever made me feel better when I feel like I'm dying than Todd Solondz. So if anybody out there is ever vomiting, like whatever, watch his movies and he will like, you know, nurse you back to health with his diabolical humor.
You know what? It's been 13 years. I saw it at TIFF, and I remember not being blown away, so I was annoyed. But you know what? I think it deserves a rewatch. And I always, it's like, oh, wait a minute, God, freaking Christopher Walken and who's Woody Allen's ex? Mia Farrow or his parents?
Yeah.
I forgot the whole cast. So,
Justin Bartha.
Yeah, Selma Blair. They reunite after Storytime. I was like, so you know what? Maybe in the next week or two, maybe I'll give it a rewatch because
Also,
I think 13
no
years.
comedies come out anymore. Like, I mean, I shouldn't say no comedies come out anymore.
No,
There
but I
are
know what I
com-
know. But
Yeah.
it's like, but in comparison to like the era that you talked about before, you're right. There aren't. You know
Well,
what
at the
I mean?
beginning of this year, I did a video where I discussed the entire year of 1999 in one video. And what I realized by the end of the video, not only is it very easy to do a top 10 list of movies from 1999, there were enough comedies where you could do a top 10 list of just comedy.
Yeah.
Because it's like South Park, Bigger, Longer, Uncut, and things like that, but also American Pie. And I was like, just in 1999, you can come up with a pretty goddamn good top 10 list just within the comedy genre. That would be like this year. I think we're going to actually have a situation where you could come up with a top 10 list for horror, but definitely not for comedy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, just as a way of starting to wrap this video up, where can people find what you're working on? Social media, podcast, writing, etc., and so forth. Give us the full spiel of Marcus Pinn.
Yeah. Go to PinlandEmpire.com. Like I said, I'm super active on it. I'm updating old stuff. I'm putting old reviews from other websites onto my own personal blog now, and I'm writing about new stuff as well. So there's that. At Pinland_Empire, that's my Twitter/X, but I'm still shadow banned. But my Hokuto at Hokuter_Empire account is alive and well. I think that's my more fun account. It's just action, anime, martial arts,
and anime.
violence.
Yeah. But what's so frustrating about your weird shadow ban situation on Twitter is how even if I type out your name in full, like Pinland Empire with caps with the underscore in between, it will still act like you don't exist. So I just look up Hokuto and then I'm able to find you within that. But it is so perplexing where like they just made you invisible. And I think it just boils down to 1,000 years ago, you posted a few nudie pics, but that also doesn't make any sense because I have a Twitter account called Savage Comics where I only post.
I love that account. account.
I only post lewd imagery, and I think I'm up to 73,000 followers there. So it's like, I think because your Pinland Empire account posts like art house, like European art house stuff, as well as like professional wrestling and nudity, they just don't know what you are, what to make of you.
And sometimes music. Oh yeah, that's a good point. No, but it was literally the scene in the remake of Suspiria where she's opening up her chest. I compared it to that scene in Videodrome. But that's what got me in trouble. But I posted way worse stuff. That's what's so confusing. I posted way more graphic, gory stuff that is like, that's the other thing though. Anything from December 2020 and older is still not shadow banned. So like if I retweet something from 2018 or 2019, it'll show up in the feed. But anything new that's media just gets this like annoying sensitive thing. But I put so much effort into Hokuto Empire now. I've been seeing so many cool movies because I like keeping that account going. I have this newfound love for like John Ford and silent films, Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd.
I love your comparisons between John Ford movies and George Miller movies. And you always you'll have like a quote about George Miller's influences and you'll pull something like a scene from like The Iron Horse, which came out literally 100 years ago and compared to Furiosa, which came out only a few months ago. And that's why I said at the beginning of the episode, you are the side-by-side GOAT and there is no close second.
And just so you know, I still post side-by-sides on my main account, but it's like 17 people see them. But it's like I have a lot of stuff that will never make it to Pinland Empire, and they're just sitting on my camera roll on my phone. So it's like I might as well share it with the few people that are going to see it. So you know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, Marcus, it's always a pleasure and a privilege talking flicks with you. When I saw this Blu-ray was coming out, because I want to start doing a lot more Blu-ray reviews on this channel here and there, especially for a movie that I dearly love. But I was like, there's only one guest that I could think of that would be like, precisely who I want to speak to about happiness. So thank you so much for coming on and
anytime
flicks with me.
Anytime.
Well, cool. Well, we hope y'all have enjoyed this episode. Definitely check out Marcus's material. I'll leave a link down in the description below. And coming up, I'm going to be reviewing Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power season finale tomorrow. I'll be seeing David Cronenberg's The Shrouds tomorrow. I'll be seeing some more New York Film Festival movies after that, but plenty of stuff coming our way. And hopefully I can lure Marcus Pinn back onto the channel in the not too distant future. But remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all that good stuff. And more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.
Ain't like it used to be, but it'll do.
You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow.